Why am I always drawn to men who need fixing? Why do I find myself in relationships where I'm always giving so much and not getting the same thing in return? Why do I keep choosing relationships where I am the one that's always giving, but people aren't looking out for me in return? Why do I keep finding myself attracted to people who don't look after me the way I look after them? Why am I always attracted to the same type of relationship, the same type of people, where I am always the initiator? I'm always the one who is helping. I'm always the one that's giving, but when I need it, I don't get it in return. In order to truly address that problem, that cycle, that issue, my very first tendency, my inclination is to point back to your adolescenthood, to point back to your childhood, to point back to your home. Majority of the time, I'd say 90% of the time, when we find ourselves constantly in a relationship, constantly in situations in which it seems as though we are the ones that are choosing people who need to be fixed. They always need to be fixed, and I'm always the fixer. I'm always the giver. I'm always the one that's giving, but I'm not getting in return. My natural question is to ask you, what was your childhood like? What was your relationships with your parents like? What was your relationship with your siblings, if you have any siblings? What was those relationships like? Because there is a good chance that when you were introduced to love taught you that you must always give, with the consequence of sacrificing your own needs in the process. What do I mean by that? It's a good chance that you have codependent tendencies and don't know it. We don't talk about it enough in church. We don't talk about it enough in religious and spiritual spaces. But the truth is, somewhere in your childhood or somewhere in your past, you developed this need to be needed, right? And you being needed gives you a natural high, but it also drains you at the same time. It's a double-edged sword. And when I say that love taught you to sacrifice your happiness and needs in the process, what I'm saying is, many times, those of us who enter into relationships, you look at your friendships as well. It's a good chance that it's not just your relationships that lack reciprocity, but almost all of your friendships and platonic relationships, your employment, your career, almost all of them are in balance. You almost are always the one that's giving and not necessarily receiving. You've convinced yourself that you're just a nurturer. But the truth of the matter is, women, if I'm talking to women, yes, God created you to be a nurturer, right? But you will misuse or you will abuse that gifting and that calling and say that you're just a nurturer, when in fact you're just abusing that. And that's not what God called you to be, a nurturer to everyone at the expense of your own needs. What do I mean by what the core of what I'm trying to get to you is this. Many times you didn't have a childhood. Many times you had to be the sister, the bigger sister, you had to be the mother or the father, right? Or the spouse to your parents. You've had to be more than just a child. And so many times you had a parent that you needed to look after, or you've had your siblings who you had to be the parent for. And as a result, you were taught that if you love someone, you must always sacrifice, you must always give, you must not necessarily think about what you need in return. And so in childhood, I'll ask you, what was the relationships like? What were the personalities like? Why? Because oftentimes we will leave home. We're taught that love looks a certain way. And so in childhood, if love meant that you have to not have a childhood, if you can't go and have friends, if you must always be fixing things around the house and fixing situations that are broken in your home and trying to help feed your siblings or trying to help keep your father who is an alcoholic or your mother who's an alcoholic, whatever the case is, we often leave home with an understanding and a warped theology of love. And so we enter into our relationships, we enter into our friendships with an understanding that I must always be a giver and I must not ever communicate and articulate what I need, because love taught me that I don't get much in return, right? And so most of us are going into relationships, going into friendships, replicating the love that you were taught when you were young. And the truth of the matter is, just because you learned it in your home doesn't make it gospel. And so many of us have tool bags, toolkits, and so every relationship, every friendship we enter into, we're taking out our tools and we're trying to fix people. Because I was always taught that I must fix people in order to be in a relationship with them. I must fix people in order to have a friendship with them. I must always be fixing. I must always be initiating. I must always give everything that I have and not necessarily get anything in return, because that is what love looked like when I was a child. But you have to take off that uniform, because love is reciprocal. Love gives as well as receives. And so many of us have to begin to pay attention to our codependent tendencies, meaning that we need to be needed, even if it's a dysfunctional relationship. Even if it means that I don't get anything in return, as long as I'm needed, I am loved. That is not love. Love gives back to you. Love builds you up. Love is reciprocal. Love is clear. Love gives commitment. And so the reason why we're always attracted to dysfunction, always attracted to people who are fixed, is because you left home, and every relationship you enter into, you're trying to finish what is unfinished from your childhood. You're trying to fix what was broken from your childhood, and you're trying to convince yourself that you can actually make something work, because whatever it was in your past, whatever marriage, whatever relationship didn't work, whatever you saw in your childhood, you're trying to prove to yourself that it can actually work now. But I speak to that dysfunction right now. You have to take off of that uniform. You have to begin to think clearly. Who has God called you to be? Because any relationship in your life that does not give back to you, you must always reconsider the purpose of that relationship, or if you should be in relationship with whatever it is. Yes, we should give. Yes, we should be selfless. But you should not always be giving at the expense that you do not get anything in return. That is not love. And you might say, what do I do now in return? You need to heal. You need to become aware of self, aware of what is broken or what was broken or what you think love is. And we must then go to the Bible, and we must begin to correct and erect a healthy theology of love, a theology of singleness, a theology of dating, a theology of marriage. Because you will not be healthy if you continue to enter into relationships trying to replicate or fix or avoid what you saw in your childhood. You are not your past. May God bless you. Peace.